Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is training, and we're going to be discussing pre-exhaust method for big gains without big pains. So this has come up in a couple conversations with gym members and with clients, and I figured it'd be a cool kind of topic for a quick little podcast. Was the idea of what is pre-exhaust and why would people use it? So pre-exhaust is a kind of a training technique in which you do kind of like lighter weight, more isolated movements before you would do your heavier, more compound movements. So typically, people in normal kind of workout structures, they would do some type of movement prep, kind of whole body warm-up, movement warm-up, and then they would go into their big heavy lifts. Then they would kind of have their mediumly weighted lifts, and then their lighter weighted lifts. That's kind of the sequence that it normally goes. So pre-exhaust, what that does is that would take your light weighted ones or your medium weighted ones and put those before your heavy based work. Now, why in the world would people do that? So the benefits is it gives more precise targeting and stimulus to weaknesses. So for example, as a bodybuilder, say I want to bring up my chest. And I do a lot of chest presses, like with dumbbells or barbells or machines, and it just seems to always grow my triceps or my front delts. I never seem to really get my chest maximally involved, or my chest doesn't grow well from those exercises. So what you can do is you would do chest flies before you would do your chest presses. So what that does is it could be any kind of fly. It could be cable crossover, machine flies, dumbbell flies, whatever. You just kind of do like your full normal kind of working volume of an exercise of chest flies. That pre-exhaust and kind of beats up the chest tissue, wears out the chest tissue a little bit of the resources. So then when you go into your chest presses, your chest is now like kind of the weakest link of that exercise. So whenever you push chest press to failure, like any exercise really, it fails when the weakest muscle involved fails, if that makes sense. So we've all done like, well, not all of us, but if you've ever done like a really heavy back exercise, sometimes your back doesn't feel all the way exhausted before your grip wears out. Well, if your grip wears out before your back does, maybe your grip got 100% stimulus and your back only got 70% stimulus. Well, technically that's a grip exercise now. So you just did a very elaborate grip exercise. So what tends to happen for people when they're not feeling their chest grow well from chest presses and typical chest movements, it is because something is failing before the chest gets fully exhausted. So by wearing out the chest, that would actually help you feel the chest more during chest presses, and that way you can get kind of more growth out of them. So there are different ways to use pre-exhaust. So that is one way where you wear out the target muscle before the big movement. Another way of doing it would be to wear out a thing or a big strong muscle that gets in the way when you're doing the big movements. So let's say, for example, and there's like pros and cons to why you would use either one. So, but let's say, for example, somebody when they're doing chest presses, they can really all they ever feel is kind of like their front shoulders. So maybe we would have them do like front raises, so dumbbell front raises for the front of the shoulder, wear that out. And then when they went into chest presses, that muscle that's typically strong and dominant is now weak, so therefore the other muscles can get involved. The chest might now get involved, the triceps can get better involved, now that the front delt or the front shoulder isn't as dominant. So how do you know which way to do it? Is if you don't knowingly have a dominant muscle, then you want to do it where you target the one you want to grow first. So if I want my chest to grow, I would do chest flies before chest presses. If I know that during chest presses, I have a dominant muscle, and regardless of whether I wear out my chest or not, that dominant muscle always kind of takes precedent. Well, then I have to wear that out. So then you might do an example of front raises before you do chest presses. So it kind of depends on why you're limited in your growth through that first kind of primary exercise, the one you really want to be good at. So in this example, chest press, is we want to get our chest to grow from that. Is it simply because our chest doesn't feel like a lot of stimulus during that movement? Or is it because we have a dominant muscle that takes over? If you feel like you have a dominant muscle that takes over, then you have to pre-exhaust the dominant muscle. If you don't feel that, and you just feel like I have a hard time feeling my chest in general, then you would pre-exhaust your chest. So that way it's more sensitive going into the chest press, and you might have a better chance of feeling it work. So there's kind of a little bit of caveats on which way you would use, but there's a pretty good kind of description of them. Now, you can also use pre-exhaust for strength training. So everything we just talked about was bodybuilding, so for aesthetics. But now what do we do for strength-based? So let's say, for example, in your conventional deadlift, as the bar passes your knees, you kind of get like kind of a shaking motion, and you have a hard time getting the bar to keep going. That typically is related to weakness in the hamstrings, specifically the upper hamstrings underneath your glute. So if you do dumbbell stiff leg deadlifts before you do your regular deadlifts, that helps stimulate the hamstrings more during regular deadlifts. So that would be another idea, is you can pre-exhaust either the dominant muscle. So maybe my quads always take over, and I just kind of, let's say lower back. So for a conventional deadlift, let's say that your lower back always takes over. And you try to feel your hamstrings, you're pretty sure you know you're doing it well, but man, that back just kind of grabs the weight all the time, it just kind of always is dominant. Well, you can pre-exhaust the lower back, and then try to deadlift. If you do this, you'll realize, oh shit, my back can't do what I normally want it to do, so something else has to step up. And then you might be able to get your hamstrings to step up and do more work. So that would be another example of trying to pre-exhaust a dominant muscle. Now, if I just wanted my hamstrings to get more involved, and I don't feel like I have an overly dominant muscle, like the muscles work kind of evenly, I just can't feel my hamstrings well, then you would pre-exhaust with a hamstring exercise, like dumbbell stiff leg deadlifts, something like that. So that's typically the way we would use pre-exhaust. So if you're a bodybuilder, you can pre-exhaust your target muscle before the big movement, or if you feel like you have a dominant muscle, you'd pre-exhaust that to get it out of the way. And that's pretty much the same thing for a strength athlete as well. So again, the benefits is it gives us that more precise targeting. So therefore we can stimulate a weakness more efficiently than traditional structures of training, where you do the big movement, the medium movements, and the small movements. Because often it's the small movements when you're trying to target your weaknesses, and by then you're worn out, you're tired, and you're not going to get the best of quality. So sometimes putting those first in the workout gives you a better quality of that effort. And then when you go into the bigger lifts, you can feel that muscle better. And then also you already have your quality of work in to bring up that weakness. So another benefit is pre-exhausting muscles before a big movement. It lessens the weight load capabilities of that larger movement. So yes, it temporarily makes you weaker. But that's a good thing because since you can't use as heavy of weight, the workout tends to be less stressful on the joints. So if normally I deadlift 405, I do some techniques and now I'm only deadlifting 325. Well, that drop of 80 pounds is 80 less pounds that my joints have to deal with. So it actually is ease of joints. So this is one of the ways I promote people to train whenever they're either older and have joint issues, like arthritic type issues, or they do manual labor, or they have a physical job, and they really don't want to get injured. They don't want to be sore all day at work, so they kind of want to protect their joints. You do a lot of pre-exhaust. It does make you, in the moment, weaker, so they can't express their strength as well at that workout, but it doesn't actually make them long-term weaker. It actually makes you long-term stronger, okay? So it does lessen the weight that you can use. However, that weight that you do end up using will still feel really freaking hard. So if you do that pre-exhaust, like example, from 405 down to 325, so you do enough hamstring curls and some other odds and ends that your deadlift goes all the way down from 405 to 325. That 325 is still going to feel like 405. So you're still going to get a very good CNS, your central nervous system stimulus. So your body's still going to remember what hard, heavy weights feel like, because you're making the weight feel hard and heavy by that time. And then also, since the weight load is lower, your body can recover quicker, allowing you to target weaknesses more often or train more often. So this is a really cool way if somebody wants to bring up, say, upper back weakness. They can pre-exhaust different parts of their back before they do their heavier kind of rows and pull-ups and pull-downs, they would pre-exhaust specific areas that they want to grow. And that way they can train it more often since they're using less heavier weights now that they're tired. So that's kind of another benefit. So the benefits, like we said in general, is more precise targeting of the known weaknesses that you want to attack. The lessened weight load capabilities actually makes it easier on the joints and speeds up your recovery so you can train more often if you wanted to. And then also, even though it is lighter, it doesn't feel lighter, so you still get a really good CNS stimulus. Now, what are the negatives of pre-exhaust? The negative is that you won't be able to perform as well that day. So if I really wanted to do a 405 deadlift and I do a bunch of hamstring curls before I deadlift, I'm probably not going to get that 405 deadlift, right? So that's the only negative is if your workout was specific to a weight load performance, weight load related performance, then pre-exhaust is not going to be the best idea because you're beating yourself up before you have the chance to try that big weight. So if I have, like, say, a max effort day and I'm testing to see if my programming has been working for the last 16 weeks, well then no, I probably don't want to do a big pre-exhaust because I won't have the purest way to test that big lift because I'll already be tired. So that's one of the downsides of pre-exhaust, is that it does make you weaker that day. Okay? Now, when's the best time to use pre-exhaust? And usually it's if you're feeling achy in your joints or you're kind of just feeling beat up from your training and you're not really recovering well, so your body's just kind of like, ugh, it doesn't seem to be doing well at the moment. So instead of coming in and trying to perform with all the heavy weights you're used to and everything feeling like shit and everything hurting, you do pre-exhaust. You still get a great stimulus of a workout, you still get all the workload that you wanted in, but you're easing your body into the motions and you're lowering the amount of weight load capacity that it has to deal with, making a beat up kind of tired body be able to do the work that you want it to do. So it's modifying the work to the quality of the body you have, not lessening the work. And that's one of the big benefits of it, is you still get all the work you want, you're just doing it in a more friendly way to the body. Okay? Another time when it's really good to use pre-exhaust is when your food and sleep is less than optimal. So for whatever reasons, maybe you're traveling or you're returning from being sick, but your food has been crap and or your sleep has been crap. So you're coming into the workout going, oh, this is not going to be a good day. I'm underfed, I'm underslept, oh gosh. Well then pre-exhaust is a great way to make that day work and still have a good workout out of that day. So that way you take the focus off of the weight load and put the focus onto just getting the volume in, getting the work in, getting the body stimulated for growth and strength. Okay? Now, when wanting to boost workout volume, okay, for growth, but you want to protect the joints, that's another really good use. So an example of this is I train people for aesthetic-based shows, and I had a client once, relatively recently, who was doing bodybuilding, and he wanted to train every day. He found training every day to be something that controlled his mental and emotional state. And he found days off, he did not like himself, he kind of felt negative, he felt like he was wasting time, and he really had a hard time accepting days off. So what we did was we set a schedule where he trained 3 weeks in a row every single day. So 21 days in a row. Then, on the 4th week, I talked him into having to take some time off. So he only trained 3 days on that 4th week, and that's when he would use time to catch up on business or, take the wife out on a date, catch up on family events, maybe they'd take the kids to the park. So he would take that 4th week and try to make good time of the days off. But we knew that we couldn't push everything to the limit continuously. So 3 weeks of every day in a row was really already very risky or a lot of work. And what reduced the risk for us to make sure that he didn't get hurt, and he never did get hurt doing this for months on end, was that we used pre-exhaust, significant levels of pre-exhaust during those 3 weeks of training. So that way we were never overextending his recovery ability. So he could only recover from a certain amount of work every day, right? So we made sure, using pre-exhaust, that we got great workouts in, but we kept them to the capacity of what his recovery ability was. So that worked out really well. Another example is every once in a while I'll kind of go on a little bit of a kick where I try to train every single day for a certain amount of time. And it might be like, a couple weeks or months, or I've done it for years before, where I'll work out every day for a year, and I've done that for a few years at a time. just for goals and stuff, just to see if I could stay disciplined. And when I train every day like that, I do very specific isolations of body parts, where like even in the bicep, for example, I'll target the inner head of the bicep versus the outer head, and I'll target it through a shortened range first, then maybe through a heavier range. So yesterday I did a bicep workout where I did a kind of a narrow neutral grip curl with a cable, to where instead of my forearms kind of pointing straight ahead of me and my hands being shoulder width, my hands were very narrow and my elbows were kind of pointing outward. What that did was that targeted my inner head of the bicep. However, I was only using the top 3/4 of the range of motion. I wouldn't get a full stretch of the bicep. So I was doing that for sets of 30 on a cable machine. And that allowed me to get a really, really big pump in my bicep, but actually make it kind of a shortened, kind of like tight pump. And then I walked over and did standing concentration curls, like Arnold style curls, one arm curls, in which it was still cross body, so that way I was still targeting the inner head of the bicep. However, it was a full stretch at the bottom of every single rep. So every rep I would stretch to a full extension and then try to pull the curl in from there. And what that did was that pulled open that tight kind of pump feeling that I had from the first exercise. It actually created more stress, but it was specific to just the inner head of the bicep. And it was specific to just using a pump effect followed by a stretch effect. So you can see how that can get ridiculously narrow and very specific. But that's sometimes what's needed to ensure that you can train every day and not run into joint injuries. So that's something I do, and it helps me add a ton of size in my upper body. So usually when I do those little bursts, I'll gain a lot of weight. And it's just because my body starts holding more glycogen. I start putting on more muscle because I'm training it more frequently. So like right now I'm sitting around 285, and that's the techniques I'm using right now. I'm just kind of pushing my weight up before I go for a powerlifting meet in the fall, which typically requires that I lower my volume, and sometimes I'll lose weight or lose strength if I don't have a big kind of growth burst before those powerlifting-based times. So that's an awesome one for me. So that's what I use. So for bodybuilders, typical ways to use pre-exhaust, one of my favorite ways that I typically use for most average kind of bodybuilder people is they will be training every muscle at least twice a week. One time of the week it's going to be fresh and heavy loaded. One time of the week it'll be pre-exhausted. So they'll do like maybe 2 or 3, like they'll do like 1 or 2 flies before they do any kind of presses. So that's the idea, is we have one workout a week per body part that's heavy, one workout a week per body part that's pre-exhausted. Another method is to do a 4 to 8 week kind of block where you're kind of going off of like a heavy program and you want to kind of like give your body a bit of a quote-unquote rest, but you don't actually take time off. Well, then you use a bunch of pre-exhaust stuff. You still train every day that you want, but now that the pre-exhaust has lowered your weight load, your CNS your CNS still gets spiked because everything's still going to feel heavy, but your joints get to recover a little better. Everything on the body just kind of doesn't feel as beat up, so you can recover better for, say, 4-week block before going back to another heavy kind of base block. So that's a really good way. Also, another way is you can use it to start out a contest prep. So you can have super high volume training like every day with tons of pre-exhaust, and then as your calories get reduced, as your body would get more fatigued, you can reduce the amount of weight-loaded volume, switching it over to kind of more traditional-based cardio, and then just make sure you maintain your heavy lifts to maintain strength, which helps you maintain muscle mass as you diet down. So it's kind of like if I want to whittle a piece of wood down into something, the larger the piece of wood I have, the better. If it's a really tiny piece of wood, I can't really whittle much off of it, right? So if you start your prep with really high volume work, like tons of pre-exhaust, it gives you a big place to go from in terms of volume. Okay, now, another one we have, the last thing I'll kind of read through here, is for strength athletes. So you can use pre-exhaust to bring up a known weakness in the off-season. So maybe you just went and did a powerlifting meet or a strongman competition, and you're like, oh man, I really need to bring up my triceps, or oh, I really need to bring up my glutes. You can switch over to pre-exhaust and train that specific targeted muscle really high frequency and try to really bring that up in a very fast rate, okay? And especially whenever the amount of weight load you're using doesn't matter much, and you'd actually prefer it to be low so that way you can recover after that competition. So another really good way of using pre-exhaust is to help with blood flow recovery. So maybe I have really heavy leg days and my legs are kind of feeling junked up, knees are kind of bugging me. I maybe can get on leg extension and do a couple sets of 50, leg curls, couple sets of 50, stiff leg deadlifts into walking lunges for sets of 20s to 30s, and then maybe I'll go and squat. What that does, it helps me get a bunch of blood flow through my joints, even out tight musculature, and then when I go squat, yeah, I'm not going to be able to lift as heavy, but it lets me recover, lets me heal up in between those workouts that were kind of more aggressive based. So that's a cool way to do it. And then also another way I use pre-exhaust method is the workout before I want to do a really heavy max out testing. I'll do a pre-exhausted. So that way I got the volume in that I wanted, I got the work that in that I wanted, but I got a little bit of an easier stress on my joints, so then I can go into that heavy loaded day and my joints are going to feel a little bit fresher, so I actually might be able to perform a little better. So those are some uses of pre-exhaust that might get you guys kind of interested in when you might want to use it. Now, how do you do it? That's insanely specific. But in general, like we said, is you can target an isolated muscle before a big movement. So if I want bigger quads, I would do leg extensions before I do squats. If I want bigger hamstrings, I could do leg curls before I do squats or deadlifts, or even leg press or hack squats, stuff like that. So you basically do an isolative movement for the targeted muscle you want to stimulate before you do a larger compound motion or movement. So that's the most common way that people are going to use pre-exhaust. So give that a try, okay? If you want specific programming for pre-exhaust, I do have examples. So you can shoot us an email, brutalironGym@gmail.com, and I'll send you some past programs we've written for clients. You can try those out. If you want a more specific one, we can work together to make you one. But we definitely have ones you can try for free just to see if you like the idea of this, okay? So our email is brutalironGym@gmail.com if you're interested in that. Cool. So hopefully this kind of opened your eyes up to a little bit of like what's out there in the programming world. And if you ever feel like, oh, I'm so bummed, I'd love to squat, but it always hurts my knees. Well, use some pre-exhaust methods. Warm those knees up before you squat, and you'll be amazed you're going to feel better. If your elbows hurt before benching, do some pre-exhaust. It's going to help a shit ton, okay? You're going to feel so much better. So stop trying to lift stupid heavy weights if your body's yelling at you. So work with your body, not against your body. And pre-exhaust is a great way to do that. So if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Brutal Iron Gym. Also, if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. So the more people we help, the happier the world will be. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we would love to hear from you. So the podcast is for you, and we want to know what you want to learn about, okay? You can reach us at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.